I've crossed the Swale numerous times on the way to fishing Sheppey's seafront, but I had only fished the Queenborough stretch before, and I've always fancied to go fishing for the bass which reside under Kingsferry Bridge. This is a low water mark which I first tried out at the end of October. Most traffic to Sheppey now uses a new bridge which is on my left. This is part of the A249, but I'm casting between the stanchions of the old bridge which still carries the railway line to Sheppey. The tide has turned and started to come in. It's running from left to right, and I'm only going to be here for about 2 hours, since I'm planning to fish on Sheppey for the rest of the day. So this is only a try-out session to see what it's like, with a view to fishing it more seriously in the future. I've probably chosen to try it at the wrong time of the year, expecting it to be much better in the summer. I'm only using one rod, and I've only got ragworm as bait, and at the moment I'm using a 2-hook long snood clip-down rig with size 1/0 hooks. A plain continental lead is fine until the current speeds up. However, for this session I've probably already been gone by that time. I'll move my rig if I don't get a bite straight away. That quite often gets a response. I'm retrieving my rig very quickly, since there's quite a lot of snags here, as you'll see later on. As usual, I'm using Google Earth to give locational details, first starting with regional setting. For those unaware, the Swale separates Sheppey from the rest of North Kent. I consider Sheppey's seafront to be the easternmost part of the Thames Estuary. Zooming in on Sheppey, I'm identifying some of the main venues and then those along the Swale. Queenborough used to be a good match venue when the flounders were present, with a goalpost at Emley Ferry and Hythe Ferry, also known low water marks. What used to be referred to as the flounder bank is no longer fishable, since Emley National Nature Reserve doesn't allow fishing. To fish the southern bank at Kingsferry, follow the signs for Ridham Dock as you come off the A249. There's some parking between the two bridges and along Ridham Dock Road where there's also some fishing. For the northern bank, you drive down Ferry Road and park near the gate at the end. If the gate is open, it's not advisable to drive through it since it could be closed at any time. I've identified the precise locations for where I fished for this video. During this session, crab activity is quite high and I'm having to frequently change my baits. Rapid snatch bites are the norm, and you're having to wind in really quickly so that your fish doesn't get stuck in a snag. I did lose a few during this session, as you'll see later on. This is the average size of fish I've been getting, but I know there's a lot bigger ones here. In the short time I was here, I managed 5 bass, but the session didn't start off as planned. To begin with, I set up far too close to the Kingsferry bridge, and that caused quite a few problems. There's a slipway here, which is convenient for putting gear on to keep it off the mud. However, that slipway also provides a clue as to the other water users, and I was treated to a display of jet ski antics. Jet skis, however, didn't stop the bass biting, but hitting the bites was a bit of a problem. When I'm getting lots of scrawly bass bites I can't hit, I like to stand up and hold a rod against the tripod. Sometimes it helps you hit the snatch bites, and if you miss one, instead of winding in, just put your rod back down again. Having hit a bite and feeling the fish on, the second problem arises. Not having fished this stretch before, I wasn't aware of where the snags were, and that ended up quite costly today. I didn't wind in fast enough, and the fish got me snagged. When this happens, I first try to budge it from a different angle. If that doesn't work, I'll try from the other side. Alternatively, you can feed out a lot of line and hope that the fish swims out on its own accord. That doesn't work for me that often though. So it's off to my right hand side to try and pull that fish out. There's no getting that rig out, so it's time to pull for the brake. I reset the gear and fish on, but I should really have moved away from the bridge. I did catch a couple of schoolies here on a 3-hook clip down rig, but the rig choice was wrong, and certainly the location was as well. Even the small schoolies were heading for the snag, so after losing another rig, I decided it was needed to move towards the left. It's a lot muddier there, but when you strike and wind in quickly, you can move the fish away from the snag. Frustrating session, but plenty of lessons learnt. Nothing big was caught, but I could see that there was potential for. The next time I fished here was a stop off on the way to fishing a short session at Deal. Again, this is only for a couple of hours, so it's another recce really. I wanted to see if I could catch without losing gear and try something different. So right from the start I set up well away from the Kingsferry bridge. One rod was set up for fishing the bottom, but I also decided to set up a float rig and see if I could catch on that. Once again I'll only be using ragworm as bait. I'm using the 07 rod with a 30-pound braid, and I've also got my Arcadia set up for the float fishing. Let's have a closer look at the rigs. For bottom fishing I decided to try a loop rig to begin with, but if I get problems with this I move over to the rig I ended up with using last time. The float is a sliding polystyrene version. I'm starting with the loop rig first, and then going over to the float fishing later on. I get a snatch bite straight away, but I miss it. I then decided the float rod's a bit in the way. It's causing a bit of a distraction, so I'm going to move it out of the way. Things went a bit quiet, so I set up the rig that I used at the end of the last session. I found that the flathead was useful since it helped bringing up the rig up in the water quickly, and that helps with avoiding snags. However, a decent fish will still try and pull your rig into a snag, and just to make the point, a fish has just done that right now. I managed to pull the rig out of the snag, but the fish is well gone. Time to swap over to the other rig. I'll catch a couple more schoolies in quick succession, then decide to have a go on the float. The tide has just started to turn and is moving slowly from left to right. I've set the stop knot, so I'm fishing about 20 foot deep. This should be about right for the middle of the channel. You can see where I've cast to, but unfortunately I can't zoom in on the float. Since it's flat calm, these are perfect conditions for float fishing, and it's quite easy to mend a line. It only takes about 5 runs down until I get my first bite, and I'm into a fish. Again, not very big, but it seems a lot easier to get this one in than when ledgering. I catch another one, and that's the experiment over. So float fishing is definitely a viable option here. I'm looking forward to giving that a go in the summer. Back to ledgering, and I'm still getting plenty of bites. This time it's a double shot of smaller schoolies. Like the previous session, I could have stayed for a couple more hours, and I'm sure I would have carried on catching. If I'd given the float another go, that too would have been likely to have produced. Best thing about this session though is that I didn't lose any gear, and I think that I fished it better based on my experiences from the previous occasion. The following day I decided to return and use up some leftover bait. This time I decided to go and fish it from the north. Again, this wasn't going to be a long session, so I didn't have a lot of bait left over. I really only wanted to find out whether it was any more convenient to fish from this bank and what the snag situation's like. As you can see, it's just as muddy on this bank and there's some large boulders covered in oysters. I'm also guessing that there's some of those in the water that you can't see. It's a lot colder from the day before, and I'm only going to try ledgering. There's also a bit of rain in the air, so conditions definitely aren't as pleasant. Very quiet start, without any bites. I've got here earlier than the day before and the water is still running out. One good thing though, so far I've not connected with any snags. You don't really know what the snag situation is until you give it a go. So a few short sessions are always useful before you decide to spend more time on a venue. Nothing happened at the start of the session, so I decided to move under the bridge and fish it from the other side. Perhaps I should have set up here first, since there's far less mud here, and from this side the water was still flowing towards the bridge. I've left half of my gear where it was, since I still intend to move back and fish it when the tide turns. Again, it's just as slow here, and I can't believe the difference between yesterday's session and this one. Then I start getting a few bites, none of which I can hit. The bites are quite strong knocks, but the bait doesn't look touched, so I'm thinking that they're not schoolies. Eventually I hit one of those knocks, and it doesn't feel like a schoolie. A small dogfish saves the blank. I couldn't hit any more of those bites, and the tide's turned, so it's back to where I started from. It's still very quiet, and it's like a completely different venue to the day before. Eventually I get a bite and I manage to strike into it. The fish tries to snag me, but I prevent it from happening. I feel a bit better now, since at least I managed to get a schoolie. Next cast after this fish, I have a bigger fish on, but unfortunately that one does snag me and I lose the rig. Although I could have carried on, that persuaded me to pack up.